All right, Olivia, we got together. We finally did it. It's been a while. Olivia, you and I, we were connected through a mutual friend of ours, and I'm glad we were because you had a podcast, I have a podcast, so there's definitely something there that we can go ahead and talk about, right? But I also learned more about you and your journey as well, and that's what this podcast is all about. So, Olivia, if you don't mind just opening up and starting with, who you are, what you're doing, and then we just figure out how you got to where you are today.
Yes, and thank you. As I always say, the podcast community, it's a big community, but it's so tight knit as well. And I love that about the community is you become friends with hosts, you connect, and there's that common ground. And I really find you become friends, long-term friends that help each other's shows and goals grow. And to answer your question, how I got here is, as I say, through continuous learning and through continuous experiences. So if you had asked me when I was in college if I'd ever do a podcast, let alone host a podcast and have that be my career, I would laugh. If you told me that I was going to end up starting my own business, maybe not as much since I entered my university as an entrepreneurship major, but quickly after my first year switched, I'd be like, okay, I kind of know I'm going to do that. I, as I said, I started in entrepreneurship, but I wanted to do sports management. I'd managed multiple high school sports teams. I was an athlete myself growing up, and I knew I wanted to be in the sports space. But the way my curriculum at my university was built, I quickly realized I needed to get tools outside that curriculum to do what I wanted to do as an entrepreneur, which was sports management. And sadly, the curriculum I was learning was more focused on starting a business, maybe starting an app, maybe doing different things, but not really what I was looking for. So I ended up transitioning into business management with a minor in sports studies and law. And I was a manager for two of my university's D1 hockey programs, the men and women at that time. Fast forward a little bit, I ended up interning at the New York Giants, where I ended up working for 8 years, and it was an amazing journey. And through that was kind of the first glimpse of how my mind and my journey is a little bit different. I always knew that the experiences we have in life and the knowledge we gain from them and the opportunities that come up today might not come up a year, 2 year, 5 years down the line, and really try to take full advantage of that. So conversations I would have in the sports industry with my athletes, because I was in player engagement, PR, and I managed some of those athletes, was what are we doing today outside of football? What are some goals we have? Are you thinking about these things? And because I personally knew that whether due to injury or due to just deciding to retire, their career was going to end at some point. Fast forward to 2019, I decided to go back to school to get my master's, and I ended up getting my master's in supply chain management, where, knock on wood, perfect timing because COVID hit and there was no sports really happening. And I had started a student organization of the ASCM, which is the Association for Supply Chain Management chapter at my university, and went and sat on the state board of Connecticut. And people from the international board were coming to me and were like, we hear you have some interesting things going on. And again, to me, it was nothing different. Okay, well, shouldn't I be involved in my community network if I want a career in this? I ended up working for Lockheed Martin for 3 years. And during that time, I was a professor teaching career development. I ended up writing a book, Achieving Success in Career Development, where this idea was then brought to me. Have you ever thought about having a podcast? You have such a dynamic background. At this point, I had a degree or certification in every business area. And so I really knew how to connect the dots and have these challenging conversations and dynamic conversations. And I was like, no, but do you have a podcast division? Like, let me hear more before I say no to this opportunity. He said, no, we just think you should do it. Fast forward a few months, I decided to not go back and teach. But this, in the back of my head, this thought of how can I still make an impact? How can I still help other people? And it took some self-reflection, and that idea of a podcast kept popping back in my head, but not just a podcast. I wanted, again, to make that impact. And when I thought about what the impact could be, I really started to think about all the spaces I had been in different times in my life, in different places in my career, whether I was that intern, I was working a part-time job, a full-time job, whatever it might be. What were the conversations we were having? And a lot of the time, it was around this idea that you don't get from point A to point B or to point C in a straight line. What society has placed as success and the way to get there is not everyone's story. And I was like, let's pull this back. So that's when I decided to start my business and my podcast, Achieving Success, LLC, and the podcast Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. And very quickly, due to the in-depth knowledge and kind of that career development mindset I had of, okay, let me do mock interviews with as many editors as I can to see what works, how they approach things, as many producers as I can, different current top podcasters. I want to learn why things are performing better on back ends than not. I'm really leveraging those questions and those tools that I would use in a career development setting, along with the certifications and knowledge that I'd gained many years ago. And very quickly, the podcast grew to a top 10%. In 30 days, it was in 4 countries. Within 40 weeks, it was a top 5% most listened to podcast globally. It's currently in 40 countries and the only podcast in 7 continents. And what I realized is sometimes you have to listen to people around you, because no one cared about my career development knowledge when I walked into a room. Like, I have so much knowledge and no one cared. What they started asking me was, how are you doing this with your podcast? I'm here and I'm not seeing these same results. How can I have these dynamic conversations? How can I get on podcasts, but the right podcast to help their audiences? And at first, I kind of just was answering the questions, and then it dawned on me, this is my superpower. This is what I could give back. And that's how I ended up starting the consulting side of my business.
Wow, that was a lot there. Summed up a whole bunch of years right there. Oh man. So, I mean, did you enjoy being at the Giants Stadium and working for them?
I think I very much enjoyed it. And to this day, I honestly don't really have any bad words to say. I know a lot of people look for them, especially being a female 10 years ago in the industry and being the youngest person there, right? I was younger than some of the professional athletes in my space, which brings up a whole nother level and dimension of potential issues. But for me, the owners, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Fish, lovely individuals. Their families are lovely. They really showed me what an organization can be and what an organizational family and who puts people first can really look like. And some of my best friends to this day are my athletes, and they joke that I'll never get rid of them. But I love that. And I love the fact as well, working in professional sports, I've built relationships with athletes who've retired, who have been in the MLB, NHL, whatever it might be. But there's this common bond that even if we weren't in the same sport, or some of the athletes, um, Al Bubba Baker, for example, who's in his 60s, I call Uncle Al, because there's a level of, even though I wasn't there the same time he was, or Marcus Ogden, we understand the experiences that we each had. And even though things change over years, they don't change. And so I really enjoyed that piece of it. And it really showed me, especially at the Giants, what a positive organization can do and how that can shape your mindset as a leader, as putting people first. And then, as I say here now, an entrepreneur myself, how to think about business.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it sounded like they were more like a family. I know it was an organization, right? But it sounds like you're a family, good culture, a way to cheer people up and bring the best out of everyone. Obviously, it got to you too, right? Um, so to your podcast. So seven continents. I mean, like, really? I mean, is there is that possible? I don't know.
For me, going into January 2024, I was sitting in at at the time my boyfriend's house in Florida, catching up with my parents because I was going back and forth from Florida to New Jersey, and I was on the phone with my dad, and he's like, "Olivia, give me some updates on your podcast. Like, I feel like I have it, every time." I always say you got to celebrate the wins. So every time I would get in a new country, I would put it in our family group chat. And he's like, "I feel like I'm missing stuff." Because, family group chats, we all know they could go many different directions. And so I start telling him all the countries I'm in, and I'm rattling them off. And he stops me. I'm like, "Why are you stopping me from talking? I'm very much a talker, but like, let me just get through this list." And he's like, "You realize you're in 6 continents, right?" And I was like, "No." I never thought about it. I just thought, okay, we're adding more countries to the list. This is awesome. And I knew they range from South Africa to Ireland to the United Kingdom to Asia. Like, I knew it ranged, but I never thought of it that way. And I go, okay, that's pretty cool. And then it started this dialogue of, is it possible to get in 6 or on all 7 continents? What would that look like? And to your point, again, is it even possible? So then I started, out of curiosity, again, end of the year, so it's time to make some goals, researching and seeing, okay, do people really even live in Antarctica to be able to do this, right? Do they have towers? Does iTunes, Spotify even reach there? And I found out some very interesting facts about Antarctica, but I did find out you can listen to a podcast there. And so I said to myself, okay, that's going to be a goal for 2024. By the end of 2024, can I reach all 7 continents? Little did I know that someone who follows me on LinkedIn, who listens to the podcast, was going to Antarctica in the beginning of the new year and literally sent me a message the 2nd of January, and it's a screenshot of them listening to the podcast in Antarctica. And I was like, oh my God, is this really happening right now? And not only did it come up in my stats, but I actually had this amazing image that I got to see someone who never reached out to, doesn't know, but wanted to keep up with the podcast, saw it and listened to it. And that's how I got in all 7 continents.
That's cool. And all you had to do is say something, right? You just threw it out there to the world and somebody responded. That's all it takes. That's awesome. So, I mean, like, how do you find like engagement with your listeners?
So I do engagement in a few different ways. And I think we all have to figure out as podcasters what works for us. So one thing I think every marketing person will tell you, maybe not every marketing person, but a lot of PR companies will say is when you're trying to build a brand, personal or professional, especially professional, create an account, a business account on every social media platform. Start posting on every platform. And I took that advice at first. But just like the microphone, when you're on social media on a platform you're not comfortable with, where you don't like going, it resonates if you're doing videos, if you're doing certain things. And so I was never a big TikToker, didn't understand it. So filming for TikTok and releasing these videos just looked uncomfortable. I never used Twitter just because I never fully understood it. And so again, doing tweets just felt unorganic to me. So I decided to let's cut those out. Let's cut that noise out. And I made that decision 6 months into the business and the podcast because I was also seeing the results. Almost my whole entire audience gravitates on LinkedIn. They comment on LinkedIn, they engage on LinkedIn, they're following the business account on LinkedIn. Then they go over to Instagram. But realistically, I was noticing it was LinkedIn by a landslide, Instagram, then Facebook. And no one was caring about my other platforms. So I said, that's where I'm going to engage. That's where I'm going to post. That's where I'm going to connect and reach out to people and respond to messages. And that's how I started to engage with my audience and also see it's not just about engaging, it's also about taking feedback. And I get messages from listeners who will say to me, I love the show. I got this take away from it, blah, blah, blah. It goes on. But I also take note of those who say, I've enjoyed listening to the podcast and I've enjoyed it more since you started doing this. Can you do more of that? And I take note of that and I pivot because I understand there's a reason why they're saying it. And you have to listen to the people who are tuning in to take things away.
Yeah. So when people say something like that, do you wait till you get so many people that say the same thing? Or, you don't want to just listen to one person when there could be 100 people thinking something completely different, right?
So I take it with twofold. So if there's those 2 or 3 people that are saying something to me who have listened to, we're over 100 episodes at this point, and they've listened to at least half of them, and and they can actually tell me something, right?
Mhm.
Because let's be honest, there's people who reached out and I've gotten it, and I could tell by the first line that they've not actually paid any attention to it. They want something else out of the conversation. But when I get messages like that, I first reflect, how did I feel in the different podcasts? I'll take this individual, Mark, who in a conversation with me back and forth said, you've always been really good and I've really enjoyed how you make it about the guest. You put in like little conversations you can relate, you make it relate to broader things. But I noticed around this time, it felt like you were getting more comfortable, or you were more comfortable sharing different aspects of your life and your journey. And when you started getting deeper into relating with the guest and sharing those stories, it made me not just connect to the guest more, connect with you. And it hit me differently. And I thought about that. And again, he was the first of like 5 people around the time who said that to me. And I started to think of the time frame I was recording those episodes that he was talking about. And I started to be like, yeah, I really started to say, okay, I'm going to pull back more. I'm more comfortable. And I was more comfortable sharing different aspects of my life. And that shined through. And I said, if it's resonating with that person and I've enjoyed doing it and I have found it more rewarding, let's keep doing it. And if I get that pushback in a negative way, then I'll pivot back. But I think there could be value here. Now, again, to your point, I've gotten that one message of, I think you should really do XYZ to your podcast and, make it an hour and a half, 2-hour episode. And I'm like, as a podcasting consultant, I can tell you 9 times out of 10, that's not going to work. And you're telling me something that I know the data and the stats are proving otherwise. So thank you, but I can't actually take that because all the information is pointing separately. So I try to put it into 2 buckets and 2 different categories. One being, why are they saying this and why are they how is it connecting to them? And 2, if I were to do this, what does the data and strategy and statistics actually say about this? And what is there that possibility of it to work? Or someone saying something that doesn't actually really understand what's going on?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. They're just a listener, right? They're not the podcaster. That's how you're looking at it from you being the host. Yeah. This is great. I like, this is just awesome. Usually we don't, like you said, we don't get to sit down and talk to other podcasters sometime. But yeah, I mean, what would you say would be the number one tip that you would recommend when somebody's starting out?
Oh, there's a few. And I say the number one thing that people tend to ask me when starting a podcast and I start consulting with them is, how often should I post? And I say, there's 2 dynamics to this. The first being, you want to either post once a week or once every other week. Anything less than that, you're hurting the growth of your own podcast because you are not only allowing too much time to go in between when someone might listen to something and go, oh, I like that, I want the next episode, as well as you're hurting yourself in doing too few episodes because you're giving yourself the space to go, oh, I don't have time, I'll push it to this next week, I'll record next week, I'll release, I'll get all this other stuff done. And what inadvertently happens is that's why 84% of podcasters don't make it past episode 10, is because they have that mindset. The other part is, what is your true strategy? Just like a business, just like any role, you need a strategy in place for long-term growth. I know there's a lot of podcasters out there or people who are interested in starting podcasts who look at podcasters as, oh, that's so easy. They get on a mic and they talk and then they post it. No, there's so much more that goes into it. There's so many things you have to think about. Again, how often are you posting so that you also don't get podcast post happy, as I call it, because your first episode might release, and I've seen this happen more times than I would like to count, and they get podcast happy, and then they've recorded 6 episodes to get them through the next month and allow to be that little gap, and then they post everything. And then you've set the stage and the expectation that you're going to be doing that all the time. And they can't keep up with that. So come up with the strategy, stick to your strategy, and understand that podcasting, like business, is a long-term growth strategy that can do so many different things. It can help with marketing. It can help with personal branding, professional branding. It's a way for you to leverage your voice to help other people, give other people platforms to talk, make an impact on other people's podcasts. It gives you the ability to become and be looked at as an expert in whatever you're talking about. And it's also a way to network. And I think it's really important to look at podcasting as a piece of whatever your strategy is, but also understand podcasting itself is a strategy. You need that strategy to build the foundation to have the long-term growth.
Yeah. Now, if I understood you correctly, people are making 6 episodes and watching them all at once. Is that how I took it?
I've seen it. You are correct. And I have seen that where I will go to someone, like they'll come to me because they got into podcasting and they didn't necessarily realize how much work it was going to be. And they want to talk to me about, hey, I need to define my strategy, or I want to take this podcast to the next level. And sometimes they're literally just starting, like they're weeks in. And sometimes they're about to start, and sometimes they're 5 years in. But I've talked to more people than I would like to admit who I go, did you have a strategy when you started? They're within like the first 90 days of their podcast launching. And they're like, yeah. And I'm looking at their episodes and I'm looking at everything. And I'm like, you dropped your first episode and then you dropped 4 more the same week. And then we went to 2 the following week. And then you skipped a week. What's going on here? And they were like, well, the first episode did really well. And I had these episodes, I had like 8. So I just decided to keep releasing them. And I said, so then when I did 3 weeks later, is there no episode? Well, I ran out of my episodes and I didn't have time to record anything. Or I lost a guest, right? And I didn't have that buffer. And so I've seen quite a few times people get the podcasting bug. They love it, which is great, but they end up hurting themselves because they want to just give everyone everything they have, and it's not sustainable.
Wow. Yeah, I never heard that. So, I mean, that's why I'd asked questions. I mean, hey, if they can do it and make it work in the end, great. But yeah, that's definitely not the strategy to go with. You mentioned one key word that stood out to me. That was networking. And I agree totally with you. Me starting my podcast, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea where I was going to go with it. I did start with the strategy of 1 per week, and that's what I went with. And here I am 2 years after and over 100 episodes, and I'm still just enjoying the process. It is work, but it's also rewarding. And with the whole network, like I never even thought of it. And so like I had a few people come on and they go, oh, you should get to know so-and-so. They might be good fit, whatever. Right. And then I'll send guests to other podcasters or just guest to guest, maybe it could be a business venture they can talk about, or they have some kind of history or whatever, some kind of relation where they can talk to each other, they experience the same things in life or whatever. But that's huge. Like I never thought I'd be around the world. I'm not in Antarctica, I don't think, but it's definitely got to be a goal of mine now. So I'll see if I'm buying like a penguin or whatever and I'll just send it that way. But it's networking has been great. And, for instance, I wouldn't have met you if it wasn't for Marcus and if it wasn't for some Jill that I met prior to that. And it just kind of trickled through, right? So it's just funny how everything works out. Is there like one thing that kind of stood out to you as far as networking? Like what one big thing, like you met one person and maybe things blew up or you got to have a really good relationship?
I will say, I'm going to give a tip for networking first. So I work with some people to get them on, again, the right podcasts to help leverage their voice and use their voice in the best manner to have the most dynamic conversation as possible. And I when I started this, I didn't know I thought I knew the impact it could have, and it started to come through people asking me, and it grew to a point that part of my consulting is solely referral. But I did get a early on client who said to me, he was probably one of my first 30 clients, and he said, Olivia, and I got this email like 6 months ago because we've continuously worked together. And one of his goals is the networking aspect. And he's like, Olivia, I want to sign up for another package. He's like 5 packages in at this point. And he's like, but one of my initial goals was to use it to build my network, to hopefully be able to also speak at their organizations or be able to help some people who are first responders, because he was a first responder, and in the leadership space within that community. And I don't really think I'm getting that out of it. And I sent him 5 names out of the podcasts he had been on, out of the 40 podcasts he had been on so far. And I said, are you still talking to these people? Have you checked in recently? Have you, right? Don't wait for the host. Have you done any of these things? And he goes, this could partially be on me. No, I was a guest on their podcast. They emailed me when their episode came live, which to podcast hosts, here's a free tip. Always send an email to your guest if you want them to promote the show when the episode has actually launched, so they know to do something about it. And he goes, so I've gotten those emails. I posted about it, but then it kind of just goes dead. And I said, okay, well, if you're looking at networking as a two-way street and as a relationship builder, it's also on you, right? So you have to be willing to keep in touch with the host. And maybe not every host will do that. But for me, what I have found, whether it's with clients or as a podcast host myself, the people who get the most out of it, and even as myself, the host, is when I get to build a relationship with someone where it isn't just a give and take, right? You're on my podcast and this is what you get. It's checking in once a quarter and saying, hey, how's this that you were working on? I really liked how we touched upon this when we were recording. Tell me more about it. Let me learn more. And then it becomes a relationship. And a lot of those relationships have been built to then be referrals on both ends. Because like you said earlier, you think of someone and you're like, oh, wait, that could be an interesting conversation, or that might help them, even if it's passively. Let me connect them. But if I don't know what you're doing in the past 8 months, how am I going to know how to connect you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just brought up some relationships I created for other people in a way, right? I did share somebody that lives across overseas with somebody here in America or Canada, and now they're going to meet up next year and they're going to do a conference or something like that. So, and it's all across the board. I hear things every once in a while. But you're right. You're absolutely right. Of reaching out and just checking up on the guest or the host if you were on somebody else's podcast. So, I mean, how many episodes do you have?
So as of now, we're 108 episodes in.
Okay, so yeah, so let's just say they're all guests, right? Interviews. So you had 108
Yep.
guests that you can reach out to and say, hey, how are you doing? And then they might see what you're doing. Maybe they need your services or you need theirs, or reach out to somebody else outside of that. So yeah, that's great. Go ahead.
No, and exactly to that point, when we're recording this today, it's 108. By the time it releases, it'll probably be more. But it only 2 of those, which were my anniversary episodes, were not guests. And so that's at this point 106 that have been released. I've recorded probably 130 worth of episodes up until this point. And one of the things I recently did for the anniversary of the podcast and the business is I reached out to all my guests and asked them where they are today, what's new and interesting going on with them. And then I also actually recently did this. Every quarter, I reach out to all of, and again, last month was, October was a start of a quarter, but I reached out to all the podcast hosts I've built a relationship with. And I said that I've maybe been on as a guest myself already, or I put a client on their show, or I just built a relationship with them. And I go, how can I help you? What is something you're challenging with? Give me one thing and let me see if I can kind of untangle that web for you to make it easier. And it's one way for me to give my knowledge back to them. It's a way to help them. It's a way to start a conversation. It's a way to continue to build that relationship and add value to them and their community. And I think being able to not only to keep in touch with the podcast guests, but keep in touch with everyone in your network that you're building can be so beneficial. And I'll even use this as an example. I'm assuming, since this is happening next week, by the time this airs, this will already be live. But I'm launching a second business. My second business has nothing to do with podcasting. It's actually an apparel company, and it's a apparel company for active Coast Guard members, veterans, their families, and anyone who wants to support the Coast Guard. And there's certain items you can buy, and there's, for Coast Guard members, if they want something completely custom, they could get something completely custom made. And as I started, this had been an idea of mine since I kind of had this experience last November 2023, when my boyfriend, who is a chief in the U.S. Coast Guard, was becoming chief. And I wanted to buy something to surprise him to wear when I got to where he was stationed, to support him and be able to amp up the weekend, right? Like, oh, we're here to celebrate such a big milestone. And I looked for days and couldn't find anything. And not only did I want something to wear, I wanted something unique and memorable to give him for making chief, especially at such a young age. Couldn't find anything. Finally, I found this sweatshirt. But I had to call up contacts I had in my network to get something custom made for him because I could not find anything. And that stuck in my head. And fast forward, I love my sweatshirt. It's very comfy. I'd occasionally get asked, where did you get that? I would love to have something with Coast Guard on it, and all these different things. And I kind of let it sit in my mind and just let it go. And then we relocated to where he is currently stationed, and the conversation just kept coming up. Now, with my background in supply chain, working with companies that did promotional products, did apparel, and helping design that, I took the time to learn every step of the way. So I have this knowledge and understanding that you don't really find that often. And in the end of the summer, again, we were having conversation. The station was trying to start thinking about maybe getting shirts made. And they're like, well, what if we do this? What if we do that? Who do we turn to? And I was like, guys, the price is going to change whether it's one color or 3-color design. If you do it this way, and it all just started pouring out. And I was like, something's just telling me I gotta use my knowledge and help them. And it just started as helping them. And that was it. And then I was kind of like, I can really help people with this. And this is part of my community I'm in now. And my boyfriend was like, you're going to start a second business, right? are you sure? And I was like, okay, maybe now's not the right time to do it. And just stayed in the back of my mind. And I always say that's kind of what got me to start my podcast, was in the back of my mind. I just couldn't let it go. And I saw the vision and the impact, even though not maybe everyone around me did. I saw it. Same with the consulting side of my business. When I got into the podcasting space, it's a very big side that a lot of people don't know how to navigate, but I knew I could help them. And so I decided to do my business. Now, no one knew except my boyfriend and a few people he worked with that I was going to do this. And I didn't bring it up anywhere. I wasn't saying anything. I was like, I'm going to wait until it almost launches. I've decided to fully go in, there's no turning back at that point, to say something. And I get a connection from someone who does e-commerce to connect and talk. And I was like, oh, great. Now I'm thinking about this. I haven't had that conversation on my podcast yet about the e-commerce industry. And I'm also like, it could be really interesting. And it's something that ties to me. Like, this could be so money. And so we get on the conversation and we start talking. And I'm asking him questions because every single one of my guests goes through that initial at least one conversation with me before we schedule a recording. And we're talking and I'm learning about his background. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And we're connecting some dots. And he's an individual who has now started 2 e-commerce websites that have brought in more than $1 million in revenue each yearly. And I'm like, you know what? Let's have this conversation. I want to bring you on. Again, haven't mentioned yet my business. We get on an additional call before we record. And I go, I'm going to tell you something no one knows. I'm like, part of the reason, like, we're talking and I was asking you certain questions to see how you would respond to that was because this is what I'm doing right now. And he goes, oh my God, you should have told me. Let me, if there's anything you need, if you need a sounding board, if you're not sure of a decision, let me know. Because not only does he do that in the e-commerce space and now has been a guest on my podcast, he's a podcast host himself. And so we were able to build all these ties, but it was building a relationship on not even something he fully was aware of, that just coincidentally, timing wise, was able to connect certain dots and hold a dynamic conversation that now we've become good friends. And I'm like, okay, now when I might not be sure of a decision between A and B, I know I could trust his decision making, and I know he's going to answer me and all these different things.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great way to share a story of how you made a connection and networked, and right, just with the podcast. That's all it takes. Olivia, what's the name of Achieving Success is in the back here if you're watching this. But yeah, I mean, you can share your name of the podcast, how people can reach out to you, website, whatever you got, and that way they know what you have to offer. What is all that?
So my podcast is Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. It is on every single platform. So as long as you search that, you will find it. You could also just search Achieving Success or Olivia Atkin on Google. No brag, because I never thought this would be a thing. But if you search either one of those 2 things on the first 5 pages of Google, so you kind of can't miss something. My website is achieving-success.com. I also personally answer every single email that comes through. So if you email me at olivia.atkin@achieving-success.com, it might take me up to 48 hours, but I do answer every email. And then you can connect with me on LinkedIn by searching Olivia Atkin or Achieving Success.
Awesome. Thank you. So I do have one more question that I ask everybody. So what are 3 key things you've learned and used along your journey?
3 key things I have learned is to trust your gut sometimes, because you can't always rely on all the noise. You have to understand when to cut some noise out and listen to yourself, because not everyone's vision is your vision, and not what everyone thinks will actually work. The second thing I have learned over my many career lives is to really think about your processes and procedures of how you're doing things. You know, if you're not thinking, whether it's in podcasting, entrepreneurship, whatever it might be, if you don't think about from the very beginning, what is my process? How do I start and how do I get to where I want to end up, whether it's in one task or the whole business, it's going to be hard to grow. And so when I built out my podcast, everything got built out in I call it like a dummy's guide. Click on the computer, open Word, type this. And that way, if I'm really busy, I know the steps I have to do to make it really clear. If I ever wanted to hand something off to someone else, they have that step-to-step guide because I wrote it down while I was learning. A lot of people come to me and they're in that place of growth and have not thought of any of those things, and then they don't have time to do it. And the third thing is, and we talked about this today, it's the strategy and your network. You need to build out a strategy for anything you're doing if you want long-term growth, if you want to be doing something long-term. Also understand that it's okay to pivot that strategy sometimes. You don't have to stick with what you wrote day one. And also the power of the network you build. If you build a network that is relationship driven, it can give to you tenfold. If you build a network that is a give and take network, you're going to be standing out in the cold by yourself.
Yeah, that's not a good network. Yeah, those are all great things that you learned and used along your journey. So thank you for sharing that. Olivia, I am thrilled that you came on and we were able to talk more about podcasting, your journey. Obviously, you led us right there to it. And, it's a whole new world for podcasters out there. I don't know if the last time you might have looked, but I think it's between 300,000 and 400,000 are actually active, posting one per week. So, I mean, there's a lot of potential there for people that just getting started, but as long as they stay with it. So, yeah, thank you for sharing your experience and all your knowledge with us.
Thank you for having me on. I love talking about podcasting. So getting the opportunity to dive deep and talk about this has been a pure joy, and the time has flown.
Yes, it is. All right, have a good day. Hang on,